was the one before him, I think. Pope Julius.
I think you're right, if I remember correctly.
He had left Pope Leo X a large amount of money. He had a large cash flow, and he squandered it all. And it was over worldly things.
Right. From what I've read of Leo X, he was, it's not surprising.
Right. And he was a bit of a dandy. Right. Enjoyed the finer things in life, so to speak.
Right.
And not something that you would picture a pope doing.
Right. And he enjoyed these things at the expense of the people of the church. So all roads lead to Rome, and all the money goes back to Rome. So eventually, this money they're collecting, by basically saying, okay, you can spend, you might spend 1,000 years here, or your family member who just died might spend 1,000 years in purgatory.
Yeah.
Or a week, we don't know. But you could get them out quickly if you just pay me a few $100s, or what, the equivalent of whatever, a few $100 to $3,000.
Yeah, you can knock a couple years off.
Yeah, why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
And then that money eventually works its way back to Rome.
Yeah. And so, okay, they used the excuse of paying for the temple, or not the temple, but the St. Peter's Basilica.
Right.
And as a way to get money, basically. That was kind of like, I think that was their front, so to speak.
Right.
But in reality, he needed to refill this cash flow that he just squandered on.
So it wasn't so much that he needed the money for St. Peter's Basilica, but that he needed to refill the coffers to pay for St. Peter's Basilica because he squandered all the money on whatever.
He had enormous debt.
Right.
And, he was trying to find a way to pay it back. And so, indulgences. Let's grant the people, let's grant them a way of shaving off years in purgatory for their loved ones, and even for themselves, I'm sure, by selling these indulgences. Very corrupt. It
is. It's something that we see all too often in church history, and it's sad and it's shame, really.
Right.
It's shameful, and it gives a lot of ammunition, I think, to those who would be overly critical of the church. A lot of atheists and people who have these arguments, against the church, base them on big obvious things the church has done wrong.
Right.
Like at different times supporting things like slavery, or supporting, things like the these indulgences, taking advantage of the people. And modern day prosperity gospel preachers who take advantage of people.
Right.
They use these things to attack the church. And in all fairness, things like the Spanish Inquisition or the Crusades, for example, they love to bring those things up, and it's valid.
Right.
They have valid points because these are terrible things that happen.
Yeah.
And I think Pope Leo X was a terrible pope.
In the sense of a spiritual leader, yes. He definitely was. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about Martin Luther. So, who was this man, Martin Luther? Not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther.
And not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
Dr. Martin Luther.
Right. True.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, on Amazon, there's coffee mugs that you can buy. And I think they're randomly generated by this program or software that randomly generates things on coffee mugs and T-shirts. And it's an easy way to design new things, I guess. Yeah. But unfortunately, it says Dr. Martin Luther, and I believe there's some date, with the Reformation anniversary, and it has Dr. Martin Luther King's picture. It's kind of hilarious, but
that reminds me of I think it's on Facebook, the picture of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
I bet you're, too afraid to share this picture of Jesus.
Right. I know, it's great. And it's funny the people that fall for it.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, I'm not ashamed.
Right.
Yeah. Or if you're ashamed of him, he'll be ashamed of you. Or I see all these things. Yeah. It's hilarious.
And it's Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
All right, so Martin Luther, he was an interesting guy. Actually had a really interesting path, I guess, his journey to becoming he was a monk, and to, finally getting his master's degree in theology and teaching, to actually preaching or being the pastor of the church in Wittenberg, Germany, which led to the Reformation.
Right. And he was he studying to be a lawyer at one point?
Yeah, so his parent or his dad was a smelter.
Right. He actually ran a copper mine, I believe, in a smelting operation.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty important role that he worked himself into.
Yeah, well, he began as a peasant. He was very poor. His family, his dad was.
Right.
And somehow got into this business.
Worked his way into, basically he was running these operations for somebody very wealthy who owned mines and things.
Yeah. And became, up to status in life.
Right.
And so Martin Luther actually came from more of I would say upper middle class, maybe.
Yeah, I would think so.
In our terms.
Yeah.
And so he was granted to go to college and university. And he was studying to become a lawyer. I think he was on the fence about it because that's what his dad wanted him to do.
Right.
His father was really, I would consider more of a stern guy, dictatorish, so to speak. And was forcing him to do something that Martin Luther maybe felt, I don't know if I want to do that, but he complied anyway.
He was feeling the pressure from his family.
Yeah. And so it was on a walk home. I'm not even sure where he was coming from, but he was walking through a field and it was a lightning storm. And it was really bad, apparently. And
yeah, I've heard the story. Okay.
And so he pretty much he was running away from this lightning. And the way I envision it and the way I've read about it is, literally lightning strikes just
all around
him. And he gets down on his face.
Makes a deal.
Makes a deal with God and said, I will become a monk if you would just get me out of this situation.
Right.
Here.
Spare my life and I will devote it to you.
Right. Okay. Actually, I just want to reiterate here. It was actually an event that happened on July 2nd in 1505. He was returning to university from a trip home, and a thunderstorm or a lightning bolt struck really close to him. And later he told his father that he was terrified to death of divine judgment. He cried out, "Help, Saint Anna, I will become a monk." So he got down on his knees, on his face, and cried out to this saint. And he was good to his word. He left law school, sold all of his books, and he entered the St. Augustine's Monastery in Erfurt on July 17th, 1505. So Luther dedicated himself to the Augustinian order. He devoted himself by fasting, long hours in prayer, pilgrimage, and frequent confession. Luther described this period of his life as one of deep spiritual despair. He is quoted saying, "I lost touch with Christ, the Savior and Comforter, and made him the jailer and hangman of my poor soul." Johann von Staupitz, his superior, pointed Luther's mind away from continual reflection upon his sins toward the merits of Christ. He taught that true repentance does not involve self-inflicted penance and punishment, but rather a change of heart.
So not only was he living the monastic life,
right,
which is simple and self-sacrificing almost completely. It's way beyond what we understand as far as giving your life to God.
Yeah.
He was like a monk's monk. Like he was the most humble of the monks, and he would strive to do whatever it took to basically pay for his shortcomings and his sins.
Right. And he felt that tremendous guilt. And, he was trying to, what we call justification by works. He was doing everything he can. He'd be scrubbing the toilets with, a toothbrush, so to speak.
Right.
Just doing all the dirty jobs that no one else wanted to try to absolve these sins. And this eventually led him to see what was going on in his own life and try to try to change. Because I think he came to a point where this either has to give or, or this. Basically, it was a fork in the road.
Right.
And it was tearing him apart, basically.
Well, I think if you take that line of thinking to its conclusion, you realize that in order to absolve yourself of sin, the only thing that you can come close would be sacrificing yourself.
Right.
And if you kill yourself, especially in Catholic doctrine, there's just no hope for you.
That's the unforgivable sin.
Yeah, suicide is unforgivable in Catholic doctrine.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't even be thinkable. But that's the conclusion of that line of thought, is you have to sacrifice yourself. There's just no way to do it.
Right. And so, okay, he thought he was given a task. He had to, maybe it was some letters he had to deliver to Rome. And so he jumped at that chance to do this because he thought Rome would be that would solve all his problems. If he could just get to Rome, the Pope would bless him, and, this guilt that he felt would be completely wiped away.
Right.
So he arrives in Rome, and what does he see? This incredible corruption going on. He sees the brothels.
Prostitution.
Yeah.
Not only was there prostitution in Rome, prostitution run by the Catholic Church, brothels run by the Catholic Church for use by visiting priests and cardinals, or by the Pope.
Right.
Even. So it was far beyond just worldliness and depravity, but it was church-sponsored depravity.
Right. And, so this, I think, just totally blew him away.
It would be earth-shattering to a faithful Catholic like Martin Luther.
Right. And, someone he put his trust and hope in, and, you put your trust in man, obviously you're going to, you're going to fail.
There's a great lesson there, because a lot of times people, even today, even in the Apostolic Church, put faith in religion rather than putting faith in God.
Right.
Or put faith in a man in leadership rather than faith in God. And many stories, biblical and otherwise, modern, and like the story of Martin Luther, you're going to be disappointed if you put your faith in a man or a religion.
All right, so I just want to add a few more things about Martin Luther's experience in Rome and his trip. His trip to Rome took place in 1510, and he had very high expectations. Like I said earlier, he felt like this would finally ease his troubles, solve his problems, so to speak. When he arrived, he was quoted saying, "Hail to thee, holy Rome, thrice holy for the blood of the martyrs shed here." Luther wanted and he desired a spiritual experience, so he visited all the relics. He went to all the graves of, he visited graves of 46 popes and the cemeteries of 80,000 martyrs' bones. And as most good Catholic monks do when they visit Rome, they often would go to a place called Scala Sancta. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It translates as the Holy Stairs. What's interesting about these stairs, these were the very steps that led up to the praetorium of Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem, which Jesus stood on during his trial. These stairs were said to be brought to Rome by St. Helena in the 4th century. They consisted of 28 white marble steps, now encased in wood, and they're located next to the church, which was built on the ground brought from Mount Calvary. The Catholic Church taught that ascending these steps on your knees in an appropriate fashion, by saying prayers, and you're pretty much climbing them on your knees, reciting these prayers. In fact, Martin Luther started up these steps, and he was repeating the Lord's Prayer as he was going. But in the Catholic doctrine, they said if you do this, ascend to the top, you'll receive an indulgence for someone in purgatory that could absolve or knock off 1,000 years in purgatory. This was a pretty big deal. So he ascended each step, reciting Our Father. You could release so-and-so from purgatory, and then he would continue with the next step. Luther wanted to free his grandfather, actually.